This is a tier list, and these are fields of economics, and I want to know which ones are the best and which ones are the ones that should just be done away with. By far, this is the most requested video on this channel, to go through the fields of economics and explain what's in each field. But I didn't want to do it in some boring, drab way where I just go through and say, this is what behavioral economics is. No, what I wanted to do was provide some sort of entertaining way to go through these, and maybe a little bit of controversy, because I'm sure there are going to be people watching this video who completely disagree with these rankings. And if you do, be sure to comment below and tell me how wrong I am and what I need to do. In fact, you could make your own tier list of this. I'll put a link in the description so that way you can go through and you can show me your tier list. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter with your ranking. I'm just gonna go through these fields in alphabetical order and tell you where I am. If you're unfamiliar with tier lists, the top is the S tier. I guess this is superior, I'm not quite sure. And then it goes through A through F, which is like a normal grading system. So let's go ahead and just start with behavioral economics. Now, if you had asked me 10 years ago where I rank behavioral economics, without a doubt, S tier. It was so fascinating. It was one of the fields of economics that really got me interested in studying this further. A lot of the initial research projects I was interested in were in behavioral economics. Now, what is behavioral economics? Behavioral economics looks at psychology and economics. It looks at our decision making and tries to understand those times when our decision making doesn't line up with the models that we typically use in economics. It tries to incorporate insights from psychology, which made this really interesting. You got to see really interesting ways people behave, and in a predictable way. In fact, there's a book called Predictably Irrational. I love this. It was one of the fields that got me interested in it. I mentioned it as one of the things that got me interested in economics in my video on the books that helped me fall in love with economics. But that was 10 years ago, and I have matured over the last 10 years, and I just don't think behavioral economics is quite an S tier anymore. One of the reasons why I think behavioral economics is no longer at that top rank is that there's been a little bit of a replication crisis over the past 10 years. Now, about 10 years ago, the book Thinking Fast and Slow came out by Daniel Kahneman, went through, talks about the research in behavioral economics, and one of the topics he brought up was priming. Priming is this idea of providing subtle cues in your environment that change how you behave. One of the most famous examples was if you had somebody do like a word search or a crossword, I can't remember the exact game, but you gave them words related to bingo, Florida. Then all of a sudden, these people walked slower from one room to another. The idea being bingo and Florida are about old people. People start contemplating their mortality subconsciously, and so then they start walking slower as if they were already old. This is a famous study in psychology, and Daniel Kahneman praised this, saying that the priming effects have been established over so many papers that even though they sound implausible, you cannot deny them. Well, since then, we've had updated research that's looked at this and has just shown that priming doesn't exist at all. All of the studies are just what we would call garden of forking paths, or the research is very, very shaky. And it looks like we're finding a little bit more of that over time. So in my opinion, that drops behavioral economics a lot, because the findings that it's based on just don't have a lot of strength behind them, at least not as much as they used to. And I don't know, it feels a little overrated as well. It feels like we've kind of dialed back from it. I'm gonna go C tier on behavioral economics. I think that's gonna be probably starting off with an incredibly controversial decision, because I know a lot of people like behavioral economics. Let's go to development economics. Where is development economics on this? Now, development historically has been very low. It probably has been a C tier field, because development economics is about understanding poor countries, and we didn't have a very good understanding of poor countries. We didn't have good data. We didn't have just hardly any understanding of what was going on in these countries. But over the last 2 decades, we've seen a huge increase in development economics. We've seen RCTs. We've talked about this as well on the channel with Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee and Michael Kramer, the pioneering work they did in RCTs and how it fundamentally changed what we do in development economics. And development economics has become like the Mr. Beast of economics fields. They are just dropping money on places all over the place. Like I did a video on an experiment in development economics where they dropped $10 million on a Kenyan village to see what would happen. Mr. Beast hasn't even done a giveaway that big. Development economics has been doing really well. There's been some infighting in development economics, but you know what? I'm going to put it at an S tier. I think it's addressing the important questions of why are countries poor? What can we do to get people out of poverty? And there are a lot of resources dedicated towards making sure that this field is doing well. So I'm going to put that at S tier. So, we'll see how controversial that decision is. Econometrics is the next one on here. Econometrics is understanding how to make inferences based off of empirical data. It's basically statistics combined with economics, or econometrics is how we measure things in economics. Econometrics has been fundamental to establishing economics as what it is today. Like we get a lot of our strength from our empirical methods, and econometrics has driven that. So it's definitely high. The problem is that a lot of our advances in econometrics have already occurred. We don't seem to be making that much progress on things that people actually care about in terms of how can we do better at measuring these things. I always say, like, we had really big advances in the 90s with difference in differences, with regression discontinuity. We saw so much in what is called the credibility revolution. But nowadays, it's not like econometrics, I feel, is advancing us that much further. I'm going to put econometrics in B tier. It's great, it's important, and you need to take those classes. In my advice for taking your classes, I put econometrics as the #1 class you should be taking. But in terms of where you can be doing a research or where you could develop a lot of skills, econometrics has a lot of diminishing returns after you get through applied econometrics. The next one is economic history. Economic history it was like development economics, where it kind of wasn't as popular. It had this big cliometric revolution back in the 70s. Now, I guess I should mention economic history is pretty self-explanatory, but it's going back and understanding how economics shaped history and how history has shaped economics. There are so many really interesting avenues for economic history. And I think economic history is actually in a really good place right now because we have so much data being made available. It used to be so hard to go and collect data. You would have to travel to countries, go through their archives, dig through just files and files, trying to find something that would help you understand this country. Today, so much of this is being put up online. Not all of it, of course. But you can go through and find historical newspapers. You can go through and find archives with their whole not their whole database. I don't want to oversell this, but it's amazing how much data are being made available online, not just in the US and European countries. We're seeing it in developing countries. Economic history, I think, is at this point where it's really going to be a major rise in how popular it is, just because it's becoming way more accessible. The other nice thing about economic history is that it answers the questions that so many economic students come asking. They want to understand, why is America so much richer than other countries in the Western Hemisphere? Why do countries like Haiti fall behind? Economic history is where we go to understand these things. Development economics today is mostly about how to help people get out of poverty. Economic history is, why are those people in poverty? I remember my first economic history class. I'm in my first semester at graduate school. I'm sitting there and we're going through European economic history, going over the economic principles that shaped it. And I have this aha moment, a revelation, where I realize that economics is not something that we've just made up in modern times to describe what's going on. Economic forces have been shaping the world for centuries and millennia. It is amazing what economic history helps us understand and the context it provides for economics. It's on the verge of becoming another great field. I'm putting this S tier as well. I mean, that just, there's no way I can go against that. Next up is finance. Finance is understanding, financial markets. So we're going to look at stock markets. We're going to look at credit markets. Finance, I mean, what can I say? It's what a lot of people think economists do. I don't do any finance, but people will always ask about the stock market. They'll ask about the housing market, which are more realms of people in finance and economics. They get paid more than economists, so I'm a little bitter about that. I'm putting finance down in D tier. Industrial organization is the next one on this one. Industrial organization is about understanding the structure of the market. How does the number of competitors affect the quantity and price of goods in the market? And it's moved on beyond just that. Industrial organization is looking at things like market design, auction theory. There's a lot of really cool things that industrial organization is doing. It's getting closer to being the engineering of economics, where we're actually actively making decisions about how our economy functions. It's where you get a lot more of your economic regulation, like rules about monopolies and cartels. But industrial organization, the tool set they have is really limited to really specific fields. So one of the common jokes in industrial organization is that you just study breakfast cereal, because that's what a couple of really famous papers were about. Was this is the industrial organization of breakfast cereal, whether there's monopoly power or not. And they just seem so limited by what's available to them. So it's cool. It's interesting. I'm not quite sure. You know what? I'm feeling B tier. And let me explain to you why. I kind of wanted to go for C tier on that one, but I'm going to go B because of the market design auction theory place. Like that, we've seen a couple of Nobel Prizes in that. This year's Nobel Prize was on auction theory, and that is that engineering aspect of industrial organization. I think that part is cool. I think we're going to see a rise in that over time. I don't think we've gotten to the point where we definitively can say that that's where industrial organization is going, but I think that if it's on that track, we're going to see it go up in tier rankings. But for now, I'm just going to put it at a B. Next up is labor economics. I don't have any strong facts on this, but I feel like out of all the fields, labor economics must be the most popular. And that's because labor economics has really spurred some of the most subfields of economics. So what is labor economics? It's essentially economics dealing with anything with humans. Development economics does this a little bit. Economic history does this. So development economics is defined by where you're going. Like you're in poor countries. Economic history is defined by when you're going into the past. But labor economics really feels more defined by who. It's people rather than organizations or markets like you would see in industrial organization. So labor economics includes health economics, education economics, and really just there's kind of in a field called applied micro that's really what labor economics has evolved into. So labor economics, super good. Arguably S tier, that's going to be where a lot of people believe that's where it should be. But you know what? They still haven't decided if the minimum wage hurts employment or if immigration shocks affect employment. These are big questions, and we have a lot of evidence for this, but we've been just debating a lot of the same questions in labor economics for a long time. So it's hard for me to put all the way up at S tier. I'll put it at A tier just to satisfy the masses. I don't know. Labor economics is fantastic. I was planning on being a labor economist, so it's a great field. I'm just not going to put it at S tier because I think it's got some room to improve. How about macroeconomics? Again, macroeconomics is studying the macroeconomy. So how does the entire economy interact and grow? What happens when there are recessions? What causes recessions? These are all really big, important questions, which makes it go up towards S or A tier for sure. But it's also one where we don't have fantastic answers. We don't understand when recessions are coming. We can't predict all of these things. We have a lot of hindsight on this, so that's getting me to lower it down. And frankly, like, it bothers me that our division of economics nowadays is, are you doing macro or micro, right? Like, all of these other fields are considered microeconomics, and macroeconomics gets its own classification. I don't know, like, why did we decide macroeconomics is half of economics when really it's not that much? I'm putting it D tier. Sorry guys, macroeconomics, it's just not that appealing to me. Like, the things that are interesting are economic history, trying to understand how economies evolve. Macroeconomics doesn't hit for me. Next up, Marxist economics. We don't even need to discuss that. That's going into F tier. We don't need any of that. That's just garbage. It's not really economics. Sometimes they'll list it as Marxian economics. I think that's because they want you to think you're studying Martian economics. That's not it, guys. Stay away from it. It's like someone offering you a yellow snow cone. Don't trust them.
Snow cone? No, don't worry. It's lemon.
Micro theory. This is going to be just trying to understand choices and the constraints that people face, the incentives they face. This is where you'll get some game theory. Micro theory is important. It's something that helps you develop your intuition. But lately, I just don't know the questions they're focused. We have not had like big advances in micro theory in a while. Some of that is because those advances came in industrial organization, like in auction theory. That would be where some of those advances occurred. We're seeing some of that in behavioral economics. But it's just, again, like, we haven't seen that much of an advance in micro theory, and the questions that they seem to be addressing, to me, just don't seem that important. It seems like they make up questions to seem like they're important, but ultimately aren't things that people really care about. I'm going D tier on that. Wow, look at that. All my D tiers so far are the ones that people think are economics when they think of economics. Micro theory, macroeconomics, and finance. And everything above that is what I consider what really economics is. I guess econometrics is like the dark horse up there. It is not what people typically think of. It is more of a theoretical field. And you know what? I'm ranking it higher. No problem there. The last one up is political economy. This is trying to understand how non-market forces interact with the economy. So these are going to be things like political institutions. It's going to be things like conflict. It's, protests, riots. They're not market environments, right? We don't see quantities and prices being set there. However, they're still influenced by economic forces, and they also influence economic forces. So this is a really interesting field. I really am interested in political economy. A lot of the research I do is related to political economy. I think my big holdback here is that I don't know where political economy is going. What are the applications? I mean, sometimes it's testing and making sure we understand which institutions are good for an economy or how they affect the economy. How does conflict change how people make choices about education? I like that it does those things, but it feels a little bit retrospective. We look back at what's going on in politics and then look at the economic effects. I don't really, like, if we had a perfect understanding of political economy, what would we then change? How would our lives be different? It's hard for me to understand. I think political economy itself would say, like, even if we had a perfect understanding of political economy, it's hard to change those institutions. So while I like political economy personally, that's where a lot more of my research interests are. I'm not going to quite put S tier. I'm going to put A tier just because I don't know what the end goal of political economy research is. So there you go. That is my final rankings. S tier is development economics and economic history. I got to say, I'm totally unbiased when I'm making these decisions here. All the way down to F tier is Marxist economics. But I guess I should point out that there is a big gap between D tier and F tier, by the way, and there are not that big of gaps between S and D. In fact, related to just about any other field you could be studying, everything else fits in under D tier, but above F tier. Don't worry. Like you can never go right when you're going for Marxist economics. So don't worry if you're somebody who's like, I like behavioral economics, but Craig said it was a C tier. It's still way better than lots of other options you have. So what do you say? Do you agree to these rankings? Is there another tier list you want me to do? Or what other videos would you like to see? I'm listening to you subscribers of Market Power because I want to make sure that your questions are answered. And we will see you next time here on Market Power.